Hey, before we get started here, I just want to let you know that as a little thanks for listening, my company's offering listeners to this podcast some free software. So if you want to learn more about that, we have some more details at the end after the interview. Alternatively, track me down on LinkedIn and I'll have a pinned post at the top of my profile. Just search for Joe Meadows and we'll take it from there. All right, let's get started. Hi there, this is Joe Meadows and welcome to Safety Leaders Now, the show where we cut through the noise and identify the strategies and tactics that today's top safety leaders use to keep their teams safe. On this episode, we've got Chris Moulden. Chris is Corporate Safety Director at ARB, which is a subsidiary of PSC. Really interesting guy. Is there anything in particular that you got from the conversation?
Chris is super humble, which is really always fun to listen to. He had a very fascinating start to his safety career. I loved hearing about all of the experiences that kind of led him to his current leadership role. What's interesting is everyone that you've interviewed has had such different paths leading up to where they are today, which is good for me to take into consideration because I find that I tend to beat myself up for not following the footsteps of whatever leaders are in my space. But I have all the evidence I need right here. So great conversation.
There you go. So we touched a little bit on, well, not a little bit, quite a bit on Chris's journey. We won't totally spoil it here, but I'll just say that it involves helicopters underwater. So hopefully that keeps you listening. We talk a ton about leadership. I think that's really clearly something that Chris is really passionate about. And it just comes through in the way that he talks. That's being an effective, clear, simple leader and using that as a way to achieve great results is something that he's passionate about. And I think shares a lot of lessons that folks can learn from, for sure. Okay, awesome. Without further ado, this is Chris Moulden, Corporate Safety Director at ARB. Great episode. Hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Chris, thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. For anyone listening, this is Chris and I's first time chatting, so you will be hearing my genuine curiosity about what's going on. So again, Chris, nice to speak to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So you came to us as a recommendation from Larry Coots, former podcast guest. Before we get into you, can you give me a little background on how you and Larry got connected?
I think that we're just in the same industry. Larry and I believe we have a lot of the same passions, and I believe it all came in from LinkedIn. And so I don't know Larry very, very well, believe it or not. However, we did have lunch the other day, and that was the first time we actually met. But I know that there's so many similarities in how Larry operates and I operate that there was an instant connection from a professional perspective. He's very passionate about leadership, just like I am, and so that's kind of where that happened. How that took off.
Gotcha. Okay. So. You guys are operating in similar spaces. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little background? What's your role? Where do you work? And what does your company do?
All right. So I'm the corporate safety director for ARB in California, but I'm also the corporate safety director for PSC Utility West. So I essentially have Montana all the way down to Arizona, all the way to the coast, the West Coast. The spaces that we operate in is we are in the energy renewable space, pipeline services, and utilities, construction.
Okay, so operating in that space, there are about 1 million jobs you could be doing. What specifically is your company doing in those spaces?
So we essentially have the ability to be an EPC contractor. So from everything from engineering, procuring, constructing. Any type of renewable type of projects, from PV panel projects to concentrated solar type projects. Pipeline work is the same stuff that just keeps getting canceled. Utilities is everything from transmission distribution of electricity to transmission distribution of natural gas and things of that nature. We work for all of the major players that you can think of, from the Chevrons to the Exxons to the Suncorps, all those major players. The PG&Es, the Sempra Utilities, those are our big major clients. But again, we we're a pretty large company, lots and lots of owned equipment. We self-perform majority of our work. We do subcontract a small piece of it. We're close to 13,000 employees at this point. We're a publicly traded organization, trading under the ticker PRIM. I can keep going if you want.
So 13,000. That's with PSC broadly. How big is ARB itself?
So ARB is about 1,500 employees in California.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then we kind of venture off to the states that are neighboring.
Okay, gotcha. And so that's the company as a whole. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into the kind of the part of the organization that you oversee? So what's the kind of structure of your safety organization? How big is the team? What are your reporting lines? What's all that look like?
Sure. So I'm the corporate safety director for the West, and I have 4 regional safety managers, 3 of which reside in California. California is quite a large state. We have the same, or actually a little bit larger population in all of Canada in California. So I have a Northern California regional manager, safety manager, a Central California regional safety manager, a Southern California regional safety manager, and then I have one that covers Colorado, Utah, and some of the other outreaches.
The mountain guy.
Yeah, and then from there, then it just cascades into your project-specific safety managers, and then we have roaming safety managers or safety technicians, and then fill in the blanks with all the different types of titles under that.
Gotcha. So how big is the safety organization itself, kind of within that 1,500 people? What do you say?
So it's 1,500 people.
30 folks?
It's 1,500 in California, but the West there's probably an additional 1,500. So I would say we're in the neighborhood of 40 to 45 safety professionals.
Gotcha. So not a tiny team. That's enough that 40 to 45 sources of joy and sources of problems. Okay, awesome. So maybe that gives us a little bit of a insight into ARB and let's say you're kind of where you are now. But before we dive into that anymore and talk about all the minutia of your working life, I'd like to take a little bit of a step back and just talk a little bit about kind of how you got here. So what can you tell me about rescue from submerged helicopters?
Oh, okay. So you did do a little deep diving. Late in the 1990s, late 1990s, I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it's a landlocked province in Canada. And so I had some of my friends that were talking about they wanted to get into this commercial diving field, and then in the late 1990s, I had this opportunity to just move away from Canada. So me and a few friends, we spun the globe, put our finger on a place, ended up being the Cayman Islands. We moved to the Cayman Islands. I met a woman who eventually brought me over to California. When I came to California, I just before 9/11, there was this advertisement on the television about commercial diving. At the commercial diving school, I swiftly applied for it, got in. Then after a couple of years of schooling, became a commercial diver with a special focus on hyperbaric medicine. From there, one of my instructors at that school ended up leaving the school. And his name is Scott Cassell. He said, "Hey Chris, you can go to the Gulf of Mexico and get on a rig if you want, an oil rig, or you can come with me, and we're actually staying local in California. We're doing there's this training operation for the Marine Corps, and it's a helicopter ditching. And what we need is a Navy dive supervisor." And I said, "Well, I'm not a Navy dive supervisor." And he said, "Yeah, but you have hyperbaric medicine. Your specialty's in hyperbaric medicine, and we need someone who can run a hyperbaric chamber, understand overinflation injuries when you're breathing on compressed air. And while you're here, we're going to teach you how to train frequent flyers in helicopters and how to get out of them, both on breath hold and on compressed air." So I said, "Well, it sounds like a lot of fun." I was young at that time. And so I interviewed for that, worked there for 5-6 years for a company called Survival Systems USA. So I brought my education to the back, or to the group. That got me in, and then I had some hands-on training on how to actually get out of these how to egress out of these helicopters when they're upside down in the water. And so that's kind of where that took off, and that's how that happened.
And and your clientele was exclusively military?
For the most part, it was military, yes. So it started with frequent flyers and then went into the specialties like the Force Recons and the Navy SEALs, things like that, but then also just normal infantry too, who might be ship-to-shore type frequent flyers.
Gotcha. And so you weren't doing like, this may be surprising to you, but I've done many of those courses in my former offshore career. So I'm pretty familiar with them. Did you guys do any offshore oil and gas guys, or it was all?
Yeah, well, the company stuff? I worked for, we did do some training for them. We sold the company. I don't know what's going on with that company anymore, but they sold some stuff to some of the other oil companies to get that training, because as you know, helicopters do go down, and when they do, if it's in the water, it's tragic. But yes, we have done some of that.
Yeah, anyway, not to digress too much, but I remember doing one of those in Batam, Indonesia, and we didn't do compressed air or breath hold. We did rebreather, and that was, let's just say it was unpleasant. I'm comfortable in the water, but those rebreather rigs are just kind of gross. It was like used training.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what I'm curious to know is there's kind of two angles that I'm interested in exploring here. Maybe let's start. You mentioned about your enthusiasm for leadership earlier. Is there anything that you think, I would assume that in that context of especially military frequent flyers, that you would have had a certain degree of exposure to their leadership structure and kind of leadership methodologies, and just in how they were operating in the pool? Is there anything that you learned or kind of took away from that experience after spending 5 or 6 years swimming with these guys?
It's a great question. I have learned quite a bit from them. Didn't think that I did, but I really did. I think one of the number one things is just to be humble. Don't think that you know it all. Everyone has something to add. Doing this type of training, and a lot of the folks who, for whatever reason, a lot of the folks that I found that got into the military in the United States, and maybe in Canada too, I don't have any exposure there, but there's a lot of that Midwest landlocked type of culture that for whatever reason gets into the military. I'm not saying that the East and West Coast doesn't either, but I just found there was a lot of that, and I don't, maybe not a lot, but there was quite a few who just weren't really fans of being in the water, and then we were having to get them upside down in a fuselage and have them stay calm and get out. In that whole exercise, it taught me a lot, because very easily I could be a dictator, and I could, when I'm in the fuselage, I could have very easily just headlocked guys and got them out. But there was this moment of calm when you're upside down under the water, or you're not able to use your voice, and you have to somehow, how do you lead an effort when you have no visual reference? How do you lead when you can't use your words? So there was it was an interesting exercise, and it came down to physical reference points and allowing the guys in the field to create that conceptual image in their mind without me, being overly aggressive or pushing people in the right direction, and really letting them take their strides at their pace, so that when or if this does happen, it's something that they actually learned, something that they can rely on, and it's something that almost becomes an automatic in the event that this event does happen. So I guess to summarize that, I realized that I can't do it all for everyone, and I need to let people show up. I'm a loud personality, and sometimes I can become overbearing. So I had to scale that back. Is what I learned for sure.
I'm just realizing as we talk about this that or I think we have a shared understanding of how this process works, and I'm realizing that people are probably listening interested in what we're talking about, but it's probably very difficult to conceptualize what this exercise actually looks like. So would you be able to just give us a quick, 30-second rundown of, if I'm doing some egress training, what does that actually look like? What are the steps of the process? And I think in the context of the kind of safety leaders now component of it, I know that in my experience, there were definitely sort of key milestones throughout that process where the folks who are a little less comfortable, maybe they claustrophobic or afraid of the water, where things tended to kick off. So I'd be interested to hear from your perspective as you run through this. What are the points in that process where people got a little flighty?
Well, first of all, the theory training is it's very deep. There's a lot of science behind not getting yourself hurt and understanding that. So a lot of physics and physiology. There's some gas laws that we should know, because we're not just getting out of the helicopter on a breath hold. If you can, it's great. But if for some reason you can't get out, you're going to get on compressed air, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the process goes like this. You'd come into the training tank. We would understand the type of helicopter that you would be flying in. We would then change all the panels on our fuselage to mock up the exact helicopter that you were flying in. And before you got into that fuselage, there was like a crawl, walk, run type of procedure. So you would get into a simulated type of chair where you just had an instructor who just got you upside down, got you used to getting the water in your nose and in your sinus and feeling that whole pain, and then trying to still have a calm mind so that you're able to get out. Once you're able to successfully do that to a certain extent, then we'd pass you on to what we called the wall, where you just put your legs up on the wall, you dip yourself upside down, then you'd have to put a regulator in your mouth with water in your nose and the whole pain of that going on. And then how do you not breathe in through your nose and just breathe in through your mouth on compressed air? Again, keep this in mind that a lot of these folks don't even like getting in the water. Now we're telling them to breathe in the water upside down, and that is an extremely uncomfortable setting. So it's as an instructor or a leader, it's very important that we are staying calm. We're not adding gasoline to the fire. Once those two elements took place, then we would get them into the fuselage 4 at a time. That way we can have some sort of control of what's going on in there. We'd have 2 instructors, one in the front, one in the back, and then we'd do a series of dunks. So what this is the helicopter would come over to the side of the training tank. The students or the Marine Corps frequent flyers would come into the back. They wouldn't have any weapons yet. We're just starting them off. We'd get them. It would be on a gantry. The fuselage would go up over the training tank. It would get sucked up into the gantry, and then it would free reel down to the water. Helicopters are top heavy, so they have a tendency to tip over as soon as they hit water, right? Because they're top heavy, and so as soon as it tips over, once it tips over, and then they're able to freely get out of the helicopter based on the training that they just received from a theory perspective. So that's pulling ripcords, jettisoning exits by straightening your arm, holding a physical reference point, maintaining your feet on the floor, which is now the ceiling. I mean, there's a lot to it. Once we were able to successfully get the guys and gals out of the helicopter and they were able to do it themselves and they had that confidence, then we added an extra element. Now you got to go to your compressed air and do that. We might throw a couple monkey wrenches into the equation. And while this is all happening from a safety perspective, we have divers on the outside, because when you're on compressed air, what the biggest issue is overinflation injuries of the lungs. So if you take a compressed air and you hold it at, say, some of these guys might be exiting at 11, 12 feet in the water. That's essentially where the pressure is starting to double. And if you hold that compressed air at that depth and come up, you have a possibility of overinflating your lungs and injecting air into parts of your body, causing arterial gas embolisms, essentially little strokes. At which point, then I would get dispatched, slam them in a hyperbaric chamber, get them down to get rid of that. But anyways, when that's all said and done, then we get the weapons in there. And now they got the weapons and they got the guys and the gals. And then when they complete that. They know how to get out of the dunker that way. Then we fill up the helicopter as if it's a full mission. So again, that crawl, walk, run, stay calm, and a lot of encouragement, because it can be, as you know, very intimidating. And then when we've done that for the helicopter of their choice, maybe it was CH-46 or 53, we would then find out if there's a second type of helicopter that they might be flying, and we'd mock it up so they have experience on that too. Because every aircraft that you're on, there's slight nuances on how to jettison the exits, how to maintain your reference point, physical reference point, all of that. So I think that should give you a little bit of a flavor of what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it brings to mind, I remember when I did the course, I was doing it with a couple of guys from Newfoundland, and they were from rural Newfoundland. And what I came to realize, despite being quite an aquatic people, a lot of the guys from that part of the world were from communities that were so small that there was no pool or anything like that, and the water was too cold to swim in. And it was astonishing that a lot of these guys spent the better part of their lives on the ocean and couldn't swim, and were very intimidated by that type of scenario, having to wait for the fuselage to fill up before you knock the window out and all that stuff. So what I'm curious to dig into now, and I appreciate you humoring me and in taking this little stroll down memory lane, but I know that there's a lot of folks who, in their capacity, as a safety director, as the leader of safety within their organization, one of their responsibilities is going to be crisis management. And I think in many ways, what you were training folks to do was to manage a particular crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, as I've had these conversations, I've realized that in the terrestrial world is not as much a focus as it was, for example, in our context offshore, where we were doing full muster fire drills once a week because we couldn't call the fire department. Yeah. There was no on-scene commander who was going to show up. That was me. So I'm curious to know, are there any lessons you took from that experience that you're applying in your role today, as it relates to whether it be crisis management or drilling hard things so that folks get used to them, or anything like that you think folks might be able to take away from this?
Yeah, I think you actually nailed it. It's building a habit from being repetitive, and then also, I guess, subconsciously, I recognize that in crisis, for some strange reason, I settle down, and I understand that the calmer I settle, the better I am able to make choices or decisions in crisis. And one of the things I've recognized, particularly in our industry, is when crisis hits, people run down the hallways with their hair on fire. And so when you're that calm mind, you can make a lot of strides in the midst of crisis. And when you make a lot of strides in the midst of crisis, I'm not proud of this, but people love that trait about individuals who can actually take control of a situation when it's, for lack of better terms, getting hairy, and then get it back on track. So definitely crisis management and just the repetitive, doing things repetitive when you want to sustainably make a change.
And do you think that repetition or that drilling or whatever you want to call it, that's going to be, folks are listening to this and asking themselves if they can keep a cool head in those scenarios? Do you have any insights as to how they could figure that out and or build that skill set?
Well, I think the first thing is you got to recognize, two things. You got to want to, and two, you got to recognize that if you don't have a calm mind, you're essentially you're more than likely operating from drunk emotions, and drunk emotions are no different than drinking a fifth of Canadian whiskey. So if you're an emotional responsive person, then I would suggest work this isn't the best. This isn't advice in a relationship. This is advice in a business setting, because my wife reminds me often that you're not at work. But if you know that you get triggered and you get angry about things, like if there's an internal anger, and if you're okay with that feeling, then there's nothing to do. If you don't like that feeling, then make an active choice to want to be calm in that type of setting. And then how to do that. but there's a million different ways. You could have a quick meditation. I know my daughter, who's 9 years old, she tells me, Dad, breathe. I know the breathing exercises. Believe it or not, you give yourself a cut 2, 3, 4, 5 big deep breaths, just like you would tell your children. There's a lot of science behind it. It's a great thing to calm you down, because what happens when you get all intense and excited, and you actually start to deprive the oxygen in your blood, and those 3, 4, 5 big deep breaths actually oxygenate the blood, which now gets you back into a state, or allows you to get back into a state of calm. And when you're calm, then now you're making rational decisions. So
Okay, I'm sure there's a few folks. I know that there's many times where I could probably take a few more deep breaths. There's no denying that. Okay, so transitioning from here. So you're a hyperbaric medicine guy, training folks to escape helicopters. Where does your career take you from there?
Well, there's multiple things that were happening.
Okay.
In my previous life, my ex-wife and myself, we, at the same time while the helicopter ditching career was going on, we also owned a business, a salon and spa, and believe it or not, it was one of the clients at that salon and spa that knew who I was as a commercial diver. And they asked me, would you ever consider getting into safety? And at which point I didn't really even know what safety was. I just figured that was something we all did. He told me to come to an open house, and when I went to this open house, I met the safety director of the company I used to work for. He found out a little bit about me. He goes, "Oh my God, you're a paramedic in the ocean. You can do all these things." And I'm like, yeah, I can. And little did I know that the construction industry at that point was very heavily like, "Hey, we need someone who can be in the field and drill fingernails and take stuff out of eyes and do first aid and da 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 da." So the safety director said, "Hey, would you ever be open to a conversation?" And I said, "Yeah, well, that's why I'm here. So sure." And right when that took place, and this is kind of interesting. I'm going to tie something together with Larry. Is while this was happening, I was actually transitioning out of this helicopter ditching survival career, and I sought out getting into the fire department. And I was actually on my last interview with LA Fire when I received a call from that safety director of that company. He said, "Hey, well, listen, I got a position that opened up for you." I said, and I'm like, oh. And I knew in my heart, I'm like, in 4 days, I got it's like 4 or 5 days. It was my last interview with LA Fire, and I think I had a really good chance. And he's like, "Yeah, a position just opened up," and this was on a Friday. And he's like, "But I need you to be on site on Monday." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, how much does it pay?" And he told me how much it paid. And I'm like, wow, that's exciting. That raised my eyebrows, so I'm open to that. And he goes, and you'll just go there, you'll meet these guys, and they'll be your mentors. They'll teach you what it looks like on a power plant. I said, "Great." I said, "Well, where do I got to go?" And he says, "Well, I need you on the big island on Monday in Hawaii." And I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna have to call you right back." And I'm in my car, and so I called my ex-wife, my wife at the time. I said, "Hey, here's the deal. I got to be in Hawaii on Monday, or should I say no and do this?" Because that safety director said to me, he says, "Well, here's the deal. If you can't make it, that's fine. We'll just get you on the next one." I was like, wow, no. When opportunity knocks, I was always told, when opportunity knocks and you feel it, walk through that door. And so I did. I turned my back on the fire department, and it was about 15, 16 years ago, and I haven't turned back. So my career started on the Big Island, Hawaii.
That's not a bad start. There's probably a lot of guys who started in, some remote oil and gas field in Fort McMurray who wish their career started in Hawaii. So how did you? I can definitely see the parallels between yourself and Larry. Being in a career that made you very conscious of risk, and then making that transition into being a safety professional. I can totally see how you guys would connect. So I'm curious. So where did it go from there? So you come in, sort of entry level guy in the field, and now you're a corporate safety director. Evidently, there was something here that stuck with you, or something that kind of got you excited enough to perform at that level. So how did that happen?
Well, so I started in the field, and I started to just understand like what safety was all about. And then I started recognizing, like, wait a second, I think I can do this. I think this is something I can get behind, and a lot of folks liked my style. They liked how I presented myself. They liked how I was more about understanding before being understood. They liked that I took more of a servant leadership stance. And then so when that project finished up, I was now out of a job. And just based on that first project, they were like, hey, listen, we have a regional Southern California position opening up. Would you be open to it? And I said, absolutely. And then so it just kept on taking off. And I know that you'll probably edit this, and it might be worth editing. This might not be the right thing to say, but I'm going to tell you, I found really quickly that the safety realm at that time, 16 years ago, for myself, was something that I found that where I saw myself very easily excelling in and climbing I was very confident that I could easily take control of what's going on. And so from there, I took over the Southern California group from a leadership perspective. And then shortly thereafter, I was asked to, hey, there's a director position opening up. So I became a director really early in my life, in my career. And so I had a lot of people take a chance on me. And the thing that got me into the director position was not my knowledge of safety. It was my business acumen and my leadership ability, I believe. And then from there, I just kept on learning more and more about safety, crisis management, case management, comp, risk, things of that nature. And now I'm nestled into this industry very deeply, and I have lots of resources, and I'm a resource for many as well.
So the part that you mentioned we might edit out, I want to lean into. So hopefully I don't dig us any holes here. But I'm curious to know. You mentioned that you were able to kind of excel through the ranks pretty quickly because of your leadership ability and your business acumen. And I think we have a lot of people who listen to this show who I think are listening to try and figure out what are those skill sets that they can add to their arsenal that are going to help them advance their careers. So what do you think? How do you think you looked at things differently that helped you stand out from a professional perspective as you were moving up?
So I guess I'll answer that indirectly, then I'll hit it right between the eyes. So I recognize that again, we're talking 16 years ago, most of the people in the safety industry that I recognized, they were very abrasive and aggressive, and they weren't building bridges. And so I quickly realized, I'm like, yeah, we're in safety, but not really. We're in the people business before anything, right? So you could be a rocket scientist level safety engineer, manager, professional, whatever, but if you can't speak to people, you're useless to me. I love that people get the knowledge, but the problem is these very knowledgeable safety professionals a lot of times lack the ability to communicate with those who don't have that same level of knowledge, and it can be viewed as the folks in the field are being looked down upon. But if you roll your sleeves up and be more of a questioning leader or a questioning safety professional, I found that was the best thing, because I'm not teaching them anything that they don't already know. I found that out quickly, and when I was watching some other safety professionals, and they would berate folks, and there was this contentious relationship between the operations folks and I'm like, it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, there's only one way for a football team to win, and one, everyone has to wear the same jersey, and then two, you got to have the same mission and move forward together. And that wasn't that wasn't always happening, and it still doesn't happen in certain industries and in certain companies, but it definitely happens here, and it did in my previous employer, with my previous employer.
So you've given me, I was trying to, as I was listening to you talk, I was trying to think, I have this great next question and I need a great segue to it.
Perfect.
And you teed it up so beautifully. I just had to call it out. So you mentioned that, for any kind of group to be successful, it's about having that sense of togetherness and having that shared mission. And I believe, and whether you agree or not, that I think a lot of the contentiousness around safety professionals, or people feeling as though a safety department is just kind of a necessary evil in an organization, is that in a way, or at least my belief is, everybody assumes that everybody knows why the safety department is there, but it's very rarely defined. It seems so implied that, oh, we're here to make people safe. But I think people don't really know what that means. So often you'll hear people say that, you're just there enforcing things for lawyers or whatever that is. And so I'm curious to know, how do you define that mission as somebody who's enthusiastic about leadership and understands it's necessary for success? What are you trying to lead your team towards from a safety perspective? What does that mean, safety, I guess?
Okay, well, there was a lot there. I guess in terms of, if the question was, how do I lead my people to be good safety professionals in the field? Is that kind of what you're saying, or?
No, I think I just more so mean being able to lead anybody anywhere is about defining the destination. It's about having that mission of saying, this is where we're trying to go. And so where are you trying to lead people? What is that mission for your safety department?
So thank you for that question, because you just teed me up. So what the efforts and what we're looking to lead is, we're endeavoring to achieve what's called a safety conscious working environment. And a safety conscious working environment is predicated on saying anything or feeling free to raise any concern free of reprisal. And so, anyone could do this with their organization as long as you created a safe environment. And typically you can do this through an anonymous survey or perception survey. But when you find out what the people in the field, including your team, like what kind of drives them, you'll find that there's always this underlying sentiment of fear, and it shows up in many different ways. And when someone is operating from the pedestal of fear, you're not getting optimal performance. There's probably a lot of things that you're not getting for continuous improvement. So as a leader, the biggest thing for me is to create a safe environment so that all folks feel that they can bring things to the table free of any reprisal. Like, they're not going to be first laid off. And so that sometimes that means the leader needs to be able to take some harsh criticism that potentially can move the organization in the right direction. Dr. Todd Conklin taught me, a lot of organizations are kind of like a Jenga block stack. And so the folks in the field are playing Jenga, and they can see all the pieces that are missing. And then the folks in a lot of organizations who are in the leadership perspective, their view is top down. And when you look top down on a Jenga stack, it looks solid and firm. But when you actually get it and you get down into the field and see where the folks in the field are seeing, that you see the gaps and all the things that need to be filled. So, I've always told my team, and including the executives, like, it's about visible leadership, because when you're visible, you're actually now playing Jenga with them, and you see all the pieces and all the things that are going to make us susceptible to risk and susceptible to injury and incident and things of that. So really just getting into the field and understanding what our folks are up against, and having an empathetic view, and then removing those roadblocks whenever we can from a leadership perspective.
So you're kind of the belief that psychological safety is foundational to everything else, making sure that people are comfortable communicating their concerns, that you have sufficient empathy based on frontline experience. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so psychological safety is the closest thing to a silver bullet for sustainable safety culture, or a sustainable culture, positive culture. If you're not interested in your people, they won't be interested in you, and then you just get what you get.
I would agree with that, but I have a different viewpoint here, so I'm interested in digging in a little bit, because I think I wouldn't disagree with you at all that it is a necessary ingredient, and I think it's also something that is it's one of the lowest hanging fruits for so many companies. But my question is often, once we solve that problem and folks are clearly communicating, they feel safe in communicating whatever it is they want to communicate, what are we doing with that communication seems like the obvious next question to me. Yeah.
Okay. So I would answer that with this. First of all, I don't believe that it's a solvable equation. It's an endeavor, and there's a journey behind it, because everyone has their own personal experiences, and then everyone has their own moment of choice. And in that moment of choice, who knows where your state of mind is at, right? So the safer that we're able to make folks feel, and I don't mean safer in terms of making sure they have the proper PPE and all that. Granted, that needs to happen, but the safer they feel like they know they're in the right spot, they've gotten accolades, or the supervisors, gracious enough to tell them what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. Like, and that's a constant feedback loop that they're getting. Like, when that's happening, and our employees see that there's no retribution for actually speaking up and saying, hey, have we thought about this, and contributing and collaborating. When we can achieve that, which again, it's endeavoring. I don't believe there's an end point to it. And I think that's fundamental to a sustainable, positive culture, which safety lies in that. And so, you're right. It's a cog in a wheel. It's not a silver bullet. It's as close to a silver bullet as you possibly can get, is what I would say. Because, Joe, I don't know how long you've been doing this for, but I know that you've probably been doing it long enough to hear what I'm about to say, and that is, like, we need to quit blaming our people. Our people are not the problem. Our people are the solution. And if we don't embody that, our number one asset, and as cliche as this sounded, but our number one asset is our relationships and our people, the game has almost been lost out of the gate. You can add as much technology you want, which I'm a technology fan, and I think the efficiencies of technology is great, but it's really, the solution comes from the people.
I would not disagree with any of that. I think you're absolutely right in all of that. I think for me, when I say I have a different viewpoint, I think what I'm largely saying is, again, I think that creating those, ultimately removing external influence from communication. It's about sort of clearing the pipes. People feel comfortable communicating what it is you want them to communicate. I think that is a very necessary input to help you solve the problem at that moment of choice. But to me, that's the goal, and it's a very obvious thing that we need to do first. But there's a second problem, and I think that's maybe all I'm trying to say.
Well, so then let me address the communication piece here, because I have some radical concepts that might shake.
I'm all for radical
you
concepts.
And your listeners.
Let's go.
So Joe, this is what I've recognized and I've been taught, and that is, no one's listening. They never have, and they never will. Okay, so therefore, then how does communication even happen? If you understand that words only make up 7% of communication, and the voice only makes up 38%, and the tone and the body language makes up 55%, most people think that the communication's happening in the words. The reality of it is we take little stock in what the words mean and are saying. It's more about how you're saying it and your tone. And what we do as a human race is we fill in the gaps and make a meaning. And at best, through communication, the meaning that the person makes on how your body language and your tone, that the meaning can get close to what you're trying to achieve, and only until you can guarantee, until you have that back and forth, can you actually substantiate that communication takes place. So communication is something I'm extremely passionate about from a leadership perspective, because a lot of people think communication is a text or an email or a voice or a text, an email, or any type of whatever, anything with the phone. Like you can't get worse in communication. So I feel like if you subscribe to what I'm saying, is that no one's listening, they never have, they never will. They make a meaning that might align with what you're trying to say. It's the meaning that is actually creating the communication for the person. Then by the person who's actually communicating, it would be very advantageous for, if you understand this, to be extremely laser clear and ask for feedback to determine that the communication actually landed the way that you wanted it. So
yeah, no, I would agree with all that. I think that that meaning comment, I think, is very interesting. I know that we, one of our very first episodes was Shane Menifee at LeGrand. He talked about the fact that they're, just to kind of bring this into the practical, he talked about the fact that a lot of organizations pat themselves on the back on how many comment cards or observations or whatever you're calling those, how many they receive. Sure. And he just said, that's a meaningless number if all they're doing is getting put in a box. And what he was trying to do was implement metrics around the response time on those things. So how quickly and effectively did we resolve the issue or communicate back to the employee? Because that's an actual measurement of organizational effectiveness in a way that simply counting inputs certainly isn't. So with that, I'm maybe to transition a little bit here. How are you measuring your team's performance against these metrics? And maybe even before that, do you think measurement is important? Because that is a contentious topic in the safety world.
It's not contentious to me. I mean, I believe that it's hard to depart from where you are if you're not measuring it. And if you don't know where you are, then how do you know where to go? You need 2 points of reference. Where do you want to go and where are you? And if you don't have that, it's an esoterical at best approach, right?
I agree 100%. So what I'd be curious to hear is, how do you respond to folks who say, as soon as you start measuring things, you're creating, hidden incentives, and people are just going to manipulate things to manipulate the numbers. How do you respond to somebody who has that opinion?
I would just say this. I think you're right. That lives rampant in our industry, particularly when you're in an industry I'll speak specifically to our space. The space that I'm working in is our clients are so heavily weigh the contractors on good lagging indicator metrics. And so I might not be answering your question, so I apologize if I'm not. But so I guess the question you asked was, how do you measure, or what are the things I measure? Is that
just how do you make sure that the act of measurement doesn't create unintended incentives within the organization? So, for example, that tracking LTI rates, people just don't report incidents. I think there's a large community out there who talks about the fact that we should abandon all this measurement because it's leading to sort of unintended consequences. And again, it's my belief that that's I think that would be an accurate application of the term Luddite, and I mean that with a lot of with no malice. But we need to be measuring, as you said, to know that we're headed in the right direction. And I think that is the study of statistics. There's right ways to do it and wrong ways to do it. And I think certainly applying a little bit more nuance to our approach and getting a little bit more into the weeds, I think that the things we choose to focus on are too coarse and too lagging to be meaningful. And I think that there is absolutely an argument there. But my response to that is that we should be measuring more things and different things, not that we shouldn't be measuring at all.
I like to make things as simple as possible so that they're palatable, easy to understand, and everyone who's engaged sees the value in it. I think that if we fall victim to measuring too much, then it's hard to determine exactly what's adding value. So, I'll give you a case in point. So here's something that we would measure. So we have an uptick in backing it up into things, but we've had this 360 walk around program for a decade. And every time we back into something, Joe, guess what? We do this great investigation. And we go, I said, Joe, you backed into the bollard. The client's really mad. Now we got to do a cause map. We got to get to the bottom of this. But I just got to ask you, Joe, did you do a 360 walk around before you? And you go, Chris, I'm offended that you would ask me that. Of course I did the 360 walk around. I'm like, okay, just checking. But then I'm thinking, wait a second. If you did your 360 walk around, you would know there was a bollard behind your vehicle.
Yeah,
and you wouldn't have backed up.
You either didn't do it or your eyesight's poor enough that you shouldn't be driving.
Yeah. So, okay. So that can got kicked down the road for 10 years. And through leveraging some technology, there's a Canadian company that I found out about a couple of years ago. It was brought into my space. And now it's something that we're actually measuring. So all four corners of our assets, which we have a lot of them, our employees have a little app on their phone. You can see here it says scan here. So every phone has a different NFC code reading capability depending where it's on the phone. They have to walk around and scan all four corners of their vehicle. That instantly goes to a dashboard, and we're able to determine who's doing the walk around, who's not. There's a monthly scorecard that everyone gets to see. So it kind of creates a friendly competitiveness to a certain extent. And then once they're able to see that they're doing it or they're not, then I believe that you can start to change that style of behavior because we're actually watching it, we're measuring it. And so something like this, Joe, since we've implemented this with almost a year now, we haven't backed into one thing. And a lot of our clients are flipping out, or because they're like, "What? We can actually measure this now? Like, no more cones in the parking lot, or flags left on the freeway, or you know what I'm saying?" So
100%.
Small value or small cost, high value things. So these are the types of things that we measure. Not to say that we don't measure our lags as well, because we're a publicly traded company, and those are the things that they want to know about. Quite frankly, those are the things that our major clients want to know about too. And I think you would agree with me, like judging a company based on their lagging metrics is going to tell me two things. One, you got a really sophisticated organization who essentially are really good CPAs and know all the regs, know all the loopholes, know how to manage everything to the nth degree, which we do. We utilize all the loopholes in the regulation. Or if you got a really bad scorecard, bad lagging metrics, that usually indicates that it's a company that might not be affected by having a bad scorecard until they are, or they just aren't. They don't really care. They'll use the turbo tax instead of getting the $1,500 CPA, right?
Yeah.
And then so that's kind of what's plaguing our industry. And I think until we stop looking at the lagging indicators as if that's actually meaningful and it's telling us the true story, we need to be looking at things that are actually moving the needle, such as like, hey, a quick behavior shift by us measuring it, showing a scorecard, and having I don't want to say we're speaking like too much about discipline, but I mean, at a certain level, you got to discipline. Once the expectation is understood and they understand it, and there's a measurement behind it, and they see the measurement and they see where they're. I mean, that now there's some teeth in that program.
And I think it creates so much more clarity, taking that, getting that away from anecdotally reported, yeah, of course I did it, to getting something that's data driven and unambiguous and really straightforward. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think what you talked about there, this idea of saying, one of my other arguments for the no metrics people is this idea that, if you think you can sit around a boardroom table and just say, we've abandoned metrics while everyone else is reporting their numbers, good luck for your job security. And I think the advancement of the industry is going to come from this idea of not measuring things, but choosing to measure things that are, a little earlier in the chain of events that actually tell us about efficacy in the field. And I think that's, that example you gave is an amazing example of something that's going to ensure, effective results at what I refer to as the point of risk. It's happening there. We're verifying that the right choice is being made by putting the right controls in place. So I'm curious, and we can use this as an example or another one, but you've mentioned that you're enthusiastic about technology. I'm interested to know what are the other cool things you're doing. But before we do that, I'm curious, was technology something that was already being used and had a lot of support when you started with the company, or is that something that you feel as though you've been influential in kind of getting behind?
I don't want to take too much credit, but I'm not great with I'm not great with technology. I'll be the first to tell you. And in some cases, I'll even resist it to a certain extent because of the unknown. But I have brought forward, just through resources, a lot of technologies that add a tremendous amount of value that might not have a digital chip in it, or an NFC code reader. So I guess when you're speaking of technology, I don't look at it specifically around iPhones and Androids and PCs and laptops. I look at it in all areas of improvement. So
with that in mind, or the reason I asked the question is to say, I think one of the questions that I hear so often, not so much on this show because we try to highlight people who are solving these problems, but from other folks is to say, I would love to be implementing this NFC, 360 check, but I can't get anybody to give me the resources I need to make that happen. So I guess I'm just curious to know if you have any guidance or any examples from your career of how do you kind of get that ball rolling? Because I'm sure with what you just explained, all of a sudden you start getting commercial response, and then the CEO is going to say, do you have any other of these things up your sleeve that we can deploy? So it's great, I think, once you start building momentum, but how do you get that started?
Well, you got to speak their language. So you got to identify who's going to be your biggest roadblock and what language do they speak in. Chances are that whoever's listening to this who wants to move the needle a little bit is going to be speaking to someone who's looking at dollar signs. So you have to translate whatever your initiative is into the language that's going to be most representative and move the needle for that individual. So say it's a COO or a CEO or whoever it might be, a president of the organization. For the backup incident, it's pretty simple. Go understand how much direct and indirect cost in one incident on average costs. And so we did some math, and then on average, if we back into a bollard on a client's facility, you start looking at the cost. The direct cost it's not significant. But when you start looking at the loss of production and the hourly wages that we have to do, and then bringing everyone in for cause mapping, and then the relationship management, and then potentially not getting work, you're looking at $10,000-$15,000 for backing into a bollard. And when you can instill, technology for $50 a vehicle, and that's the cost, you're like, holy smoke. So one incident could really pay for half of the program for my whole organization. So once they see that, hey, if we take a proactive stance, then there's a good chance that we're not going to have to manage relationships and pull people out from the field and not who should be working. And now we got to drill into their minds, understand what they were thinking. So that my guidance would be speak the language that the individual you're speaking to needs to hear the message from, and a lot of times it's from the dollar sign perspective.
And so if you come in here and you have a great business case that says, breaks down, hey, 2 bollards equals this program, but you deal with somebody who says of course you're telling me that you're trying to sell me this program. How do we, have you looked at doing pilot programs or things like that to kind of build engagement beforehand?
Yes. So we beta test everything.
Yeah.
And we always take the hardest of the hard, the guys and the gals out there who are going to try to break it. They're going to get mad about it. Those are the people who we get the information from, and then we get that. We'll get their feedback and we'll add that to the whole equation. And so, for instance, like if we're doing a cost benefits analysis presentation, that will also come up and we'll percolate. Say, hey, X, Y, and Z in the field also said that this has added a tremendous amount of value and there's an efficiency around it. And if you look, no incidents have happened on that project, whatever it might be. So the sell is like that. And I have another thing for you too, Joe, that I think this could be a big nugget. I don't know how broad your audience is, but in the United States, there's grant programs in every state. And I have an employee who works with me who specifically one of his main objectives is to identify the grant programs. So when you're able to identify performance grants, there should never be a no, because you just say, hey, this is the program we're using. This is the grant that we're applying to this program. Any questions? And by the way, I'm going to save you a ton of money. And if you go ahead and tell your Liberty or your Hartford or whoever your insurance carrier that you're doing these types of things, you're also going to get an offset deduct on the premium cost as well. So, I mean, it has to do with business acumen of the safety professional. When you're speaking, you need to know who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to them as if they don't have gloves on, then you're going to get what you get.
Yeah. That for anyone listening, that's how you get promoted, folks. Implement a program for fee that saves people money. Is there just before we'll just take a note here, if it is possible, whether comes from you or from that person on your team, if you have any links to resources people could check out just around where they can identify those grant programs or even a couple lines, love to throw that in the show notes if possible so people could get started, because free stuff is
no
awesome.
Problem.
Okay, so maybe just to pivot here, it seems like this kind of, if you're devoting resources to that degree, this technology implementation is something that's clearly important to you. Are there any other kind of programs or things like that are worth discussing here that folks might be able to get some value from?
Yes. Extremely, this is very early stages of testing this, and I'm open to talking about it. I can even show you what we're looking at, but we've had, I'm sure that in the construction industry and a lot of different industries, cuts to the hands, cuts to everything. It's horrible. I mean, for lack of better terms, it's kind of a pandemic. I mean, people get cut constantly, right? Typically how they get cut, they got their little pocket knife or they're using some sort of knives or something like that. So what is the solution? How do we get in front of that? And I met a gentleman who, his name is TJ Simone. He owns a company called Slice. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And so Slice has come up with a product that we are beta testing right now. And it's there's multiple different lines of different types of knives, and the knives are they're stout. They now have an industrial feel to them. Before it was like a very sexy feel, like an Amazon, like good for cutting box and stuff like that. But
sure,
my folks in the field with the neck beards and the knuckle tattoos, they don't want a high vis green and gray foo-foo knife, right? They want something stout and that can add some value. So they have these knives that are made they're made from zirconium ceramic, and the blades are hand sharpened. And so here's the pitch on this, and I have no stake in this company, but I'm really excited about getting this going. So
well, I'm sure TJ is going to be excited about this plug. So
I know, right?
Let it go.
So zirconium ceramic, on the hardness scale from 1 to 10, 10 being a diamond, your normal knife or your normal utility knife blade is rated a 4. A diamond is a 10. Zirconium ceramic is an 8. Okay, so and it's sharpened to the extent where it will cut essentially anything. I don't want to do too much of a spiel, but I do want to show you one of these knives just so you can see it. So this is one of the knives right here. And this
okay, so for anybody listening, Chris is holding up what looks like kind of like a USB stick with a ring on the end, and now he's
Yeah.
pulling a blade out of the side.
So so what this does is it does a lot of things. It gives the folks who want that pocket knife, it gives them that feeling, but that goes in the pocket. Get rid of the other knife, right?
Yeah.
This blade is
It's got a little belt clip. I'm just
got
going
a
to
belt
narrate
clip.
here a little bit.
yeah, it's got a belt clip.
Yep.
It's ambidextrous, so your finger goes in there to get positive control. So you can hold it with both hands. This blade will cut anything except for skin. It is the craziest thing. So they have a case, but they have a case like they have a case where I think they had 8,500 employees in Tennessee, where they built the largest soccer arena in the United States. They just finished it. 8,500 employees. This was the knife of choice. And 8,500 employees building an arena, not one cut. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, and they got a lot of different blades that I'm really excited to get the feedback, because like I said, the cuts have been plaguing us, and I'm not to say that this won't cut you if you put enough force to it, but if you did what I did with a normal blade, I'd be going to the ER right now. And so that is a very, very exciting find. And this is the type of technology that I'm talking about that moves the needle. Yep. And makes it easier to succeed and harder to fail, right? So if we're giving actual knives for safety incentives or whatever, if you don't have a good knife policy or you don't enforce it, you're gonna nonstop having cuts. We've gone the retractable knife things, and everyone hates them, and so we've like, hey, we don't want to come down on you guys and tell you what you guys need to use. You need to please collaborate with us. What can we use? Because here's the deal. If we continue going down this road, PSC has 13,000 employees roughly. It's hard to manage every moment of choice, right? Yeah. So how do you do that? You just got to make the experience easier to succeed, harder to fail.
Yeah, and I mean, it's almost like a control by elimination.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
As you said, I've worked with the retractable knife policies, and people just bring other knives from home because they need to use a knife, and those ones are horrible. So I think if you can give them the tools they want, they're not going to see you as an opponent, and they're going to
like our linemen. This is a tool to trade for our linemen. Well, now this blade here, I'm hoping to replace the actual knife that they're using, because this is shown to actually do exactly what our knives do, except for last 10 to 11 times longer.
And what's the, I mean, if you don't mind saying, what are we looking at, compared to a box cutter? What's that, 5,000 times the cost?
No. I think everyone should just do their own research on that. Again, sure. I think the cost benefits analysis conversation is a healthy one to have with this. And I'm not too deep in this. Again, this is, like I said, fresh off the press, and it's being rolled out right now in a beta test. Really excited to get some feedback. So I don't even have formal feedback at this point, except for just speaking with Slice and some of their reps about this newer line of knives that they have that I think will work in the industry that I'm in. But it's not 5,000x. It might be 3x, which again. When we look at an average cut, is going to cost between $5,000 and $10,000 when you look at the direct and indirect cost. And if anyone questions that, I would be more than happy to break that down for someone in another case study.
100%. And again, I don't mean to be indelicate, but for anybody listening who's saying, "Oh, that sounds cool, but what does this actually mean?" I mean, 3x. I think anybody can do a little mental math there and say that's a conversation worth having. So. Yeah. TJ, if you get any good referrals here, send us some knives. We'll feature them on the podcast. Okay, awesome. Is anything else? I mean, I love that because it's so straightforward and so easy to understand. Is there anything else kind of in that stack that you guys have, found driving results, or is that kind of that's your pet project right
now? So we have an active beta test going on right now. What's the strobe brake light? Have you seen that?
Okay. I have not, or let's assume I have not. Explain what you're talking about.
We have a very large fleet, and we're a large company. So sometimes it can be viewed that there's a bullseye on our trucks, and so we, in some
Sure.
cases we hit things, and in a lot of cases we are being hit from behind. And so there was a point in my career where, where like when a motor vehicle accident would come in, I was like, oh man, what happened? And then when it said, when I would read a little bit more, Johnny was hit from behind. I'm like, whew, okay, it wasn't us. But then I started thinking, like, that's not the right approach, because Johnny could have got really hurt, and someone could have got really hurt who hit us. So I need to quit wiping the sweat off my brow and say, how can we be proactive when we think that we're not at fault? And so did some research, and just with some of my resource groups, I reached out to one of my colleague who told me one of this again, small cost, high value add. It's a strobe brake light. So in a pickup truck, there's typically 2 brake lights on either side, and there's one above the cab. This goes in line, I think it's a capacitor or something like that. And what it does is when you depress the brake, and you're going to start seeing this on a lot of the newer vehicles that are being built right now and all across the board. I think UPS and FedEx and those are already doing it. I know ambulances have the pulse brake. But in essence, what it does, or what the study has shown, is that when that pulse brake happens, in the midst of all the distractions, because everyone has so many important things going on when they're driving, right? Like their buddy texted them or all that. Amidst all these distractions, that little flash, they say, can give you up to a half a second to 1 second of reaction time, which in the study that they've shown is if it's a half a second, I believe it's a 60% reduction on rear enders, and if you're able to give 1 second, you can reduce the rear enders up to 90%. So that's simple math. You just try it out. It's a small cost, and see if it works. If being hit from behind is something that you want to attack from a proactive perspective, this is a low cost, high value add technology.
Yeah,
I don't know what the company's name, but if you put strobe brake light, I'm sure you'll come up with it. You'll see it. And
there'll be a couple of happy sales reps.
Yeah, I know. I need to call them and tell them to take me out for dinner or something.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody owes you a discount.
So, but yeah, so that's the type of technologies I like. I mean, don't get me wrong, where everyone has iPads, everyone has iPhones, and everyone has all the different types of programmatic things, intellects, and all the different safety management systems and things like that. But I really like to make the user experience in the field a good experience, and one that makes it easier to succeed, harder to fail.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that I think and you spoke to this, is I think a lot of things can get a little overcomplicated, and I think a lot of safety professionals are keen to see a lot of problems, and it's really easy to come up with solutions that seem like a good idea at the time. But in so many of those situations, it becomes very evident that safety professionals are not designers, whether it be software designers or product designers, and build systems that ultimately just deteriorate from the lived experience of the employees. And those are both great examples of things that are either a net, it doesn't bother me one way or the other if my brake lights flash. It has but it's going to have a positive influence, and it's just a win-win. And I think that's something that, there's so many of those, and I think that's something we all need to be pursuing.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm just looking at our time here, where we've gone actually much longer than I expected us to, and there's actually a number of topics that we haven't covered. We'll have to save those for another one. Before we wrap things up, I'm just curious if you have any sort of closing thoughts, things you didn't get to cover, or anything you want to get out there and share with the community.
I would say this. If you're either new to this industry or you've been in this industry for some time, I'm talking specifically to safety. I just invite everyone to take more of a stance of, we exist to serve our people and make things right. Add value wherever you can. Be attentive to the folks that you're speaking to, and really hear what they're saying. Do your best to get down to the Jenga blocks. Don't be looking down on the Jenga blocks, because it always looks firm when you look down on it. Be humble. Ask questions. A lot of times, or most of the times, your solutions are going to come from our number one asset, and that's our people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's a message everybody can get
Yeah.
behind. I guess one final question. Is there anyone that you know, I guess, other than Larry, that you think we should have on the podcast?
Yeah, I know some folks.
Anyone you want to name drop right now?
Sure. I'd say Troy Allen. He is the vice president of Arterra. I would also, I would suggest Travis Brock. He owns a company called, I believe it's called Shield of Safety. He's in Washington. Troy, I believe, is in Atlanta. Kim Taylor. Kim Taylor is the safety director for the energy and renewables segment of PSC. She actually resides in Canada and does a lot of work up in Fort Mac. She's a woman in the industry. She's a hard charger, great leader. You'd get a lot of insight from her.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll leave it there. I don't want to squeeze your contacts too hard. I think 3 is plenty. Awesome. Okay, so we'll be sure to loop back with them and see if we can lean on them to get them on the show. And I guess in closing, if people want to get a hold of you, is it how, if they have any questions about anything you talked about, what's the best way to do that?
You can call me. I would
Just
prefer
call
a phone call over an email. I'm sure, just like you, Joe, after 300 emails a day or more, it's very difficult to answer or respond to everyone. It gets down to whoever has the best, most inviting subject matter, right? So I think a phone call works the best, or even just hit me up on LinkedIn is probably a safer way to go.
Yeah, well, I would just we'll encourage folks to track you down on LinkedIn, and they can message you for your phone number, and you can decide if you want to give that out. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's I think there's so much here that I think folks can get so much value from. Whether it be your perspective on kind of leadership and whether it be day to day or in crisis situations, and as well as a lot of this great tech that I think a lot of people can get a lot of value from. I know from my side, it's been great to chat and learn a little bit more about you and what you're doing. It's been a real pleasure. So again, I just want to thank you for joining us, and hope to catch you on another episode.
Joe. Thanks for the conversation. It was fun.
All right. Well, thank you for making it all the way through the episode. I just wanted to mention again, this podcast is brought to you by Opslock. Opslock is the new way to keep your team safe at work. We're basically the most modern and advanced health and safety tool out there. If that sounds interesting to you, one of the things that we're offering to listeners of this podcast is free access to our workplace observations tool, meaning that you can roll out a digital workplace observations tool in your company, no matter what the size is, for free. If that sounds interesting or you just want to learn a little bit more, go to our website, opslock.com, fill out the Get a Demo form, let us know that you heard about us on the podcast, and someone, probably me, will set up a call with you. So anyway, that's it. Thanks a lot for listening through the episode, and I hope you have a great day.